You know, Benjamin Franklin's last great quote came from a letter to his friend where he wrote, "Our new Constitution is now established. Everything seems to promise it will be durable. But in the world, nothing is certain except death and taxes." So yes, as witnessed in the story of Lazarus and what we know about this world, death is a certainty. It's unfortunate that we're often not as certain about life. Do you smell it? That smell. A kind of smelly smell. The smelly smell that smells smelly. For Mr. Krabs of SpongeBob SquarePants fame, it was the smell of an impending invasion of anchovies on the Krusty Krab. It was the first episode of SpongeBob SquarePants where SpongeBob got his job as an uber-gifted fry cook, and Mr. Krabs' smell observation became a meme. A real attention grabber in this week's gospel is a very similar statement. Open the tomb. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Can't you smell that smell? A smelly smell? An awful smell of like 4 days dead, Jesus? You don't want that. Well, it's an interesting inclusion or fact that evokes a different level of understanding of what's going on there by the tomb, don't you think? That's the kind of fact that brings us along for the ride, so to speak. We should consider how strong of an influence odor has on us. It brings back the strongest memories far more effectively than any of the other senses. Smell goes straight to the amygdala, the area of the brain responsible for processing emotion, and the hippocampus, an area linked to memory and cognition, which is the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding. Certain smells, and boom, you feel like you're back in time. That sort of quick, direct link also helps us to recognize the stuff we should stay away from out there. I did a little research and found some interesting stuff about bad smells. A substance was created to test cleaning products. The idea was to come up with the worst smell possible. They called it stench soup. Mary Roach, a science writer and author, described the smell as Satan on a throne of rotting onions. But I'm not sure that's the worst smell, because there are smells that are almost impossible to study. There's a compound called thioacetone, and it's bad, really bad. In 1889, an attempt to distill the chemical in the German city of Freiburg was followed by cases of vomiting, nausea, and unconsciousness in an area with a radius of 0.47 miles around the laboratory due to the smell. They said that diluting it made it even worse. The chemists described its smell as fearful. Sometimes shorter descriptions can be more terrifying, right? So some scientists tried messing around with it again in 1967, just south of Oxford in the UK. Here's their description. Recently, we found ourselves with an odor problem beyond our worst expectations. During early experiments, a stopper jumped from a bottle of residues and, although replaced at once, resulted in an immediate complaint of nausea and sickness from colleagues working in a building 200 yards away. Two of our chemists, who had done no more than investigate the cracking of minute amounts of thioacetone, found themselves the object of hostile stares in a restaurant and suffered the humiliation of having a waitress spray the area around them with deodorant. The odors defied the expected effects of dilution, since workers in the laboratory did not find the odors intolerable and genuinely denied responsibility since they were working in a closed system. To convince them otherwise, they were dispersed with other observers around the laboratory at distances up to 1/4 mile, and one drop of either acetone gem diethol or the mother liquors from crude thioacetone crystallizations were placed on a watch glass in a fume cupboard. The odor was detected downwind in seconds. Now, I have smelled some nasty stuff. Neglected porta potties, spoiled food, decomposition, and some chemical compounds. But nothing I would describe like that. I bet the smell there by the tomb was really bad, though. With that odor, there was no doubt that Lazarus was gone, beyond the pale, so to speak. Really, really gone. Well, Martha points out the stinking odor, confirmation that it was over and beyond hope. It stunk there. But you know what I think stunk worse? Losing one of the people you love. Feeling abandoned by God and Jesus, and both sisters let out their anger and frustration. If you had only been here, he wouldn't have died. And some major stuff begins to happen here. Jesus joins in and experiences the grief. It's very interesting. It places squarely at the center of the table the cosmic questions we have about reconciling an omnipotent, loving God with heartbreak, death, disaster, pain, and suffering. I wish I had a fast answer. But I will say this. We do see Jesus there in the midst of the pain, experiencing it alongside his loved ones. That brings me some comfort, knowing I'm not alone and that Jesus is acknowledging that pain and the whole suffering that the whole suffering situation just stinks. Death's a thing, along with all of its putrid, stinking friends. It seems that they have the upper hand here in this story. Their hold is even affecting Jesus, and he's hurting and crying and grieving. But then Jesus makes a statement. I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. Now, we've heard this verse, and I bet many of us have sung it in camp songs. But what is said here is the reason that there are those who wanted Jesus dead, even after such an amazing miracle. I'm not going to go into a long explanation, but in the Greek, there is what would be considered an unnecessary word. Jesus said, ego eimi, I am the resurrection, etc., etc. The eimi is not supposed to be used there. It's understood in many languages. The thing is, by using it, Jesus is saying something far more. He is equating himself by the use of that phrase with God, who told Moses to tell the people that I am sent me to you. Jesus is declaring his divinity and his dominion over death itself right there, right now. And he shows that dominion by the restoration of life to the seriously dead Lazarus. Jesus shows that he came so that we can have life and have it abundantly. He shows that it's not just an in the future, sweet by and by, you're in a better place kind of thing, but now in the present. You know, Benjamin Franklin's last great quote came from a letter to his friend where he wrote, our new Constitution is now established. Everything seems to promise it will be durable. But in the world, nothing is certain except death and taxes. So yes, as witnessed in the story of Lazarus and what we know about this world, death is a certainty. It's unfortunate that we're often not as certain about life. I think that's what the gospel is getting at today. Don't we often gravitate toward behaviors and the like that are not life-affirming? For quite some time, when I read this gospel, I can't help but think of that Leonard Skinner song and the lyric, Whiskey bottles and brand new cars. Oak tree, you're in my way. There's too much coke and too much smoke. Look what's going on inside you. Ooh, that smell. Can't you smell that smell? The smell of death surrounds you. Angel of darkness is upon you, stuck a needle in your arm. So take another toke, have another blow for your nose, and one more drink will drown you. Now they call you the Prince Charming. Can't speak a word when you're full of lewds. So you'll be all right come tomorrow, but tomorrow might not be here for you. The song was about their personal struggles and almost losing a member of the band to a drunken car crash. We seek a lot of things to deal with emptiness or fear or the struggles of life. And as they point out, some are surrounded by the smell of death. Why do we seek them and surround ourselves with those things? Well, there was a dog that used to live near us that I used to spend a lot of time with, and it was kind of difficult because that dog loved to roll in a puddle where there was a septic problem. Well, the other day I started wondering, and I had to know why. Turns out they believe that dogs and wolves roll in terrible smells in order to mask their scent from predators and prey. So, do we sort of do the same thing? Put up a mask pain, sadness, longing, loneliness, hurt, desperation, and discomfort by going to some of the wrong places? I was talking about a flower one time that I was infatuated with. It's called, pardon my pronunciation, Dracunculus vulgaris. It gets pollinated by flies because it smells like rotting flesh or death. Well, a church member said, "A friend gave me one of those. When it blooms, I go outside and I bury it." Well, she was going to dig it up and get rid of it, but she saved it for me to see. So there it was, flies and all. Turns out that smell of death draws the flies that thrive on death and decay and perpetuate themselves through it. Now, earlier we talked about God's name, but did you know that a name that was given for Satan was Beelzebub, which means the Lord of the Flies? We can see why, right? The smell of death, bondage, entombment, and the Lord of the Flies. And here is Jesus, bringer of light and life. We're reminded of Ezekiel's vision and the good news in Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us, to people who consider themselves as good and dead and lost in the darkness. But then, says Ezekiel, God breathes. God breathes release from the despair. God breathes hope into the hopeless. It's not too late. God breathes life into the lifeless, into dried out bones, and calls them home. Jesus calls us forth to unbind us like he did Lazarus. He calls us to life, calls us up from the things that entomb us and the lingering smell of death to life, to unbind one another, to share life, light, and freedom through our love and service for one another. It's coming. Do you smell it? That smell. A kind of smelly smell. The smelly smell that smells like Easter. Resurrection, joy, freedom, life, and victory. To be continued. Amen.